I remember the exact moment everything changed. It wasn't the funeral. It wasn't the silence in the house after everyone left. It was later that night, when his son sat across from me, barely even pretending to grieve. We want everything. That's how they said it. No softness, no hesitation. Just cold, clean entitlement. The house, the business, the accounts, every last piece of the life their father and I had built together. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just looked at them and nodded. Because right then, I understood something they didn't. They thought they were winning. They had no idea the game hadn't even started yet. My husband had always been a careful man. Quiet, observant. The kind of person who noticed what others missed and said nothing about it until it mattered. And in those final months before he passed, something about him had shifted. He became more distant, not emotionally, but strategically. He started locking drawers he never used to lock, taking calls in private, writing things down, then hiding them away. At the time, I thought it was fear. Maybe he knew his time was running out. Now I realize he was preparing. But I didn't know any of that when his sons came after me. They showed up with documents, lawyers, confidence. They painted me as the outsider, the second wife, the woman who came later and therefore deserved less. They even had the nerve to suggest I should be grateful for what little they were willing to leave me. A small insurance payout, barely enough to cover the hospital bills, and debt. So much debt. They thought I'd break. And honestly, for a moment, I almost did. Because grief does that to you. It makes everything feel heavier, slower, harder to fight. But then, something small happened. Something they overlooked. A key. It was hidden in the back of his desk drawer. Taped underneath, actually. I only found it because the drawer got stuck, and I pulled harder than usual. It was old, brass, unlabeled, and suddenly, nothing made sense anymore. Why would he hide something like this? What was he trying to protect? Or who? I didn't tell anyone about the key. Not the lawyers. Not the sons. No one. Instead, I did something they never expected. I agreed. I told them I wouldn't fight. I said, if you want everything, take it. You should have seen their faces. Relief, victory, even a little amusement. Like they thought I'd completely lost my mind. One of them actually smiled and said, "That's the smartest decision you've made." I smiled back, because I needed them to believe that. I needed them relaxed, careless. And most importantly, I needed time. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and quiet observation. They moved quickly, trying to finalize everything before I could change my mind. But I didn't. I signed what they gave me. I played the role perfectly. Meanwhile, I started following the only lead I had. The key. It took some digging, but eventually I traced it to a private safety deposit box at a bank across town. One we'd never used together. Or at least, one I thought we never used. When I finally got access, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from something else. Instinct. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't random. This was intentional. Inside the box, there wasn't jewelry. No cash, no sentimental items. Just documents. Carefully organized, labeled, detailed. And the moment I started reading, everything changed. My husband knew. He knew exactly what his sons were planning. Not just the inheritance grab, but everything else. There were records, transactions, emails, signed statements, evidence that went back years, gambling debts, failed business deals they tried to bury, money that didn't belong to them, and worse, signatures that weren't real. At first, I couldn't believe it. Not because the evidence wasn't clear, but because of how thorough it was. He hadn't just suspected them. He had been building a case, and he didn't do it alone. There was a name that kept appearing in the files. Someone he had hired quietly, months before his condition got worse. A private investigator. That's when I realized something chilling. While I was grieving, he had been protecting me, planning for a moment he knew would come. I sat there for hours, going through everything, piece by piece, and by the time I walked out of that bank, I wasn't the same person anymore. Because now, I had something far more powerful than grief. I had truth. But truth alone isn't enough. Not when you're dealing with people who think they've already won. I could have gone straight to court. I could have exposed everything right then. But that would have been too easy. Too quick. And honestly, not nearly as effective. Because people like them don't learn from small losses. They only understand consequences when everything is on the line. So instead, I waited. I let them take control. I let them believe the house was theirs. The business was theirs. The future was theirs. I watched as they made decisions. Reckless ones. Spending money they didn't actually have, trying to fix problems that were already too deep, digging themselves further into a hole they didn't even realize they were in. And all the while, I was preparing, quietly, carefully. The final hearing was scheduled faster than expected. They wanted it done, finished, clean. They thought it would be a formality. Just signatures and confirmation. Closure. For them, it was supposed to be the moment everything became official. For me, it was something else entirely. That morning, my lawyer looked at me and said, "We can still fight this." I just smiled and said the same thing I'd been saying from the start. Let them have it. But this time, I meant something very different, because what they didn't know was that the moment those papers were signed was the exact moment everything would fall apart, and not slowly, not quietly, all at once, right in front of them. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. Not dramatic, not tense in the way movies show it, just routine. Papers stacked neatly, low voices, people waiting for something ordinary to be finalized. That's exactly what they thought this was. Ordinary. I walked in a few minutes early, calm on the outside, steady on the inside. My lawyer kept glancing at me, like he was still trying to figure out if I was about to change my mind at the last second. I didn't. Across the room, they were already there. Relaxed. One of them scrolling on his phone. The other leaning back like this was just another business meeting. When they saw me, they didn't look nervous. They looked satisfied, like everything had already gone their way. And honestly, up until that moment, it had. I took my seat. No eye contact. No unnecessary movement. Just waiting. Their lawyer was the first to stand, walking through everything like it was just a formality. Assets, ownership, transfers. His tone was confident, smooth. He'd done this 100 times. "This concludes the final agreement," he said, placing the document in front of me. "Once signed, all listed assets will be transferred in full." Simple, clean. Exactly what they wanted. My lawyer leaned closer to me and whispered, "This is it. If there's anything you want to say, now's the time." I picked up the pen. For a second, I let the silence stretch. Just enough. Then I signed. No hesitation. No reaction. Just ink on paper. And just like that, they smiled. I could feel it without even looking. That quiet, satisfied kind of smile people have when they think they've outplayed you completely. The document was passed over to their side. Their lawyer adjusted his glasses, glanced down, and began reading through the final clause. And that's when it happened. He stopped, mid-sentence. At first it was subtle, a pause that lasted a second too long, then 2, then 3. His eyes moved back to the top of the page, then down again, slower this time. Careful, like he was trying to make sure he wasn't misunderstanding something. One of them leaned forward, slightly annoyed. "Is there a problem?" No answer. The lawyer didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned a page, then another, flipping faster now. His confidence gone. Completely. "What is it?" the other one asked, this time more sharply. And finally, their lawyer looked up, but not at them, at me. And in that moment, everything shifted. Because the expression on his face wasn't confusion anymore. It was realization. "You might want to read this," he said quietly, sliding the document toward them. Now they were irritated, impatient. One of them grabbed the papers and scanned the page quickly, like he expected to find some minor technical issue. But the faster he read, the slower his face changed. Confusion, then tension, then something else. "Wait, what is this?" he muttered. His brother leaned in, reading over his shoulder, and that's when the silence in the room became something else. Heavy, because now they saw it too. That one sentence, the one they had completely overlooked, the one my husband had placed so carefully, so deliberately, knowing exactly who they were. It wasn't long. It didn't need to be, but it changed everything. Their lawyer spoke again, this time with none of the earlier confidence. "This agreement transfers all visible assets," he said slowly. "But it also enforces the conditions tied to the original estate structure." They stared at him, not understanding. "Not yet," he continued. "Any party accepting full ownership also assumes full liability for all associated financial obligations, including undisclosed debts, pending investigations, and legal accountability tied to prior transactions." Now they were listening, really listening. And for the first time, they looked unsure. "What does that mean?" one of them asked, his voice no longer steady. The lawyer exhaled. "It means everything comes with it. And that's when I finally spoke. Calm. Clear. It means the debts are yours now. They turned to me instantly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The loans you thought were hidden. The money that went missing. The signatures that don't match. I held their gaze. All of it is tied to the estate you just claimed. Their faces changed again. But this time, it wasn't confusion. It was fear. Real fear. You can't, one of them started, but his voice broke halfway through. Their lawyer cut in, sharper now. Is there documentation supporting this? That's when my lawyer finally moved. For the first time the entire morning, he placed a folder on the table. Thick, organized, prepared. Complete records, he said. Financial trails, third-party investigations, verified statements. The room shifted again. Not emotionally this time, legally, because now it wasn't a dispute. It was evidence. Their lawyer opened the folder, scanning quickly, then slower. Then stopping altogether. He didn't need to say anything. The look on his face said enough. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't something they could argue away. This was real. And it was serious. How bad is it? One of them whispered. Their lawyer didn't sugarcoat it. If these documents hold up, you're not looking at an inheritance. He paused. You're looking at exposure. Silence. No movement. No arguments. Just the weight of everything finally catching up to them. I watched it happen. Not with anger. Not even with satisfaction. Just clarity. Because this wasn't revenge. This was consequence. You wanted everything, I said quietly. And now, you have it. One of them shook his head, stepping back like the room suddenly felt too small. No, we didn't agree to this. You did, their lawyer said flatly. You just didn't read closely enough. And that was the moment it broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. Their confidence. Their control. Everything they thought they had secured, gone. Because the truth is, they were never fighting me. They were walking straight into something that had been waiting for them long before I ever signed that paper. My husband knew. He saw them clearly. And instead of stopping them, he gave them exactly what they asked for. Because sometimes, the only way to win is to let people take everything, and then watch what it really costs them. I stood up quietly. No final words. No dramatic exit. Just a simple, calm step away from the table. Because my part in this was already done, and for the first time since everything began, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because I had taken anything from them, but because the truth had finally caught up. And it didn't need my help anymore. No one spoke when I walked out of that courtroom. Not to me anyway. Behind me I could hear it starting. Voices rising, chairs shifting, that sharp, panicked tone people get when they realize something is very, very wrong, and there's no quick way out. But I didn't turn around, because for the first time in months, I didn't need to. By the end of that day, everything moved faster than they ever expected. Their lawyer tried to contain it, of course. Tried to minimize the damage, delay things, buy time. But the problem with truth, real, documented, undeniable truth, is that once it's out, it doesn't go back in. The financial records were reviewed, then verified, then escalated. What started as a quiet inheritance transfer turned into something else entirely. Something much bigger than any of us sitting in that courtroom. Investigations opened. Accounts were frozen. Questions started coming from places they couldn't ignore anymore. And suddenly, the estate they fought so hard to control became the very thing pulling them under. The debts weren't small. They were layered, complicated, years in the making. And the more everything was examined, the clearer it became. This wasn't just bad decisions. This was intentional. Money moved where it shouldn't have. Documents altered. Lines crossed that you don't just walk back from. Within weeks, the narrative completely flipped. The same confidence they walked in with, gone. The same people who thought they had secured their future were now trying to explain their past. And the worst part? They couldn't blame anyone else. Because they had insisted. They had pushed. They had demanded full control. And they got it. Exactly as it was. One of them tried to reach out to me. A call. Then another. Then messages. Short at first. Then longer. Then desperate. I didn't know it was like this. We can fix this if you help. This isn't fair. I read them. Every single one. And then I did something very simple. I didn't reply. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But because there was nothing left to say. Some consequences don't need conversation. They just happen. A few months later, the legal outcomes started becoming official. Penalties, restrictions, cases that wouldn't disappear quietly. Their world didn't collapse in one dramatic moment. It unraveled slowly, publicly, piece by piece. And the same people who once sat across from me so sure of themselves were now dealing with something they couldn't negotiate, charm, or intimidate their way out of. As for me, I left. Not in a rush, not dramatically, just intentionally. I sold what needed to be sold, closed what needed to be closed, and walked away from a life that, for a while, had felt like it was built on loss. I moved somewhere quieter, a place where no one knew my name or my story. And for the first time in a long time, I gave myself something I hadn't had space for before. Stillness. It's a strange thing, starting over. There's no big moment where everything suddenly feels better. It happens in small ways. Waking up without that weight in your chest. Drinking your coffee without your mind racing. Realizing hours have passed, and you haven't thought about the past once. That's when you know you're healing. But there was one thing I carried with me. Not the anger. Not the betrayal. Just the lesson. Because what happened wasn't just about money, or an estate, or even family. It was about people showing you exactly who they are. The moment they think there's something to gain. And more importantly, what happens when you don't try to stop them. When you don't argue, don't chase, don't fight the way they expect you to. You just let them have it, everything, and trust that the truth will do what it always does. Catch up. I still think about him sometimes, about the way he planned all of this. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. He saw something I didn't want to see, and instead of warning me, he protected me in a way that only made sense later. That small key, that quiet plan, that single sentence hidden in a document no one thought to question. It wasn't just strategy, it was trust. Trust that when the moment came, I would understand. And I did, because in the end, I didn't win by taking anything from them. I won by stepping aside and letting them take everything for themselves. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this: greed doesn't destroy you all at once. It hands you exactly what you ask for, and waits